In the heart of Europe, there lived a man whose name echoed through concert halls and grand theaters. He was known as one of the finest violinists of his time, a perfectionist who demanded nothing less than excellence from himself and everyone around him. To his audience, he was a genius. To those who knew him closely, he was a storm, proud, sharp-tongued, and unbending in his views about music. He believed that music, to be called art, had to be complex, refined, and intellectually demanding. He looked down on any style that didn't fit into the world of European classical tradition. His music came from the discipline of the great masters, Vivaldi, Paganini, Bach, and he saw anything else as inferior. That belief would soon lead him into a lesson he never expected. When he arrived in Mexico City for the International Music Festival, reporters gathered at the airport to greet him. Cameras flashed as he walked through the terminal, his violin case in hand, wearing his usual tailored suit and confident smile. Everyone admired his poise, his charm, and the effortless way he carried himself. At the press conference later that evening, he sat on stage surrounded by journalists, festival organizers, and other artists. The hall was full, the air heavy with excitement. Mexico was proud to host such a renowned musician. Reporters asked him questions about his upcoming performance, about the future of classical music, and about his thoughts on the local music scene. When one reporter asked what he thought of traditional Mexican music, his smile shifted slightly. He leaned back, thinking for a moment, then spoke in his usual smooth but condescending tone. "Ah, the mariachi," he said. "It's lively, of course, but very simple. It's emotional, yes, but it lacks structure and sophistication. It's more of a folk expression than real art." The words spread quickly. The clip was shared across social media that same night. People replayed it, argued about it, and felt the sting of his arrogance. Many took offense. Mariachi music wasn't just entertainment to them. It was history, pride, and emotion woven into every note. It told the stories of families, love, struggle, and life itself. But to the Italian violinist, it was just noise that didn't belong on the same stage as his own refined compositions. The next morning, newspapers ran headlines quoting his words. Some called him arrogant. Others defended him as a purist. The festival organizers tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. A quiet tension began to grow between the visiting European artists and the local musicians, who had worked hard for years to gain recognition. That same morning, in a small town several hours away, a young woman sat in a tiny room practicing her violin. Her bow moved gently across the strings, filling the room with the kind of warmth that only came from love and patience. She wasn't rich and she didn't have a world-class instrument. Her violin had scratches and a few worn spots, but in her hands it sang beautifully. She learned music from her father, who had once been part of a small mariachi group. He taught her not by notes on a page, but by listening, feeling, and understanding what each melody meant. Her home was always filled with the sounds of trumpets, guitars, and violins playing from the radio or live gatherings in the town square. To her, mariachi wasn't simple at all. It was powerful, emotional, and deeply human. When she saw the Italian violinist's interview on television, she sat quietly for a moment. Her father was watching too. He looked at her with a small sigh. "People who don't understand often speak loudly," he said softly. But she could see the disappointment in his eyes. She didn't respond. She just looked at her violin and thought, how could someone who loved music so much not understand the beauty of hers? She wasn't angry, and not exactly. But something inside her wanted to show that mariachi music wasn't simple. It was soul. It was life. That night she practiced longer than usual. Her fingers moved faster. Her bow danced with emotion, and every note carried her determination. She wasn't famous, and no one outside her small town knew her name. But music had never been about fame to her. It was about expression, a way to speak without words. Meanwhile, in the city, the Italian violinist was preparing for his performance. His rehearsals were precise and strict. He demanded silence from everyone around him, growing irritated whenever something didn't sound exactly as he imagined. Perfection, he would say, is the only goal worth chasing. His assistant, a quiet young man from Mexico, tried to bring him local coffee between rehearsals. Once he mentioned softly, "You know, the mariachi musicians here are incredible. Their passion is," but before he could finish, the violinist interrupted with a short laugh. "Passion? Passion is common. Technique is rare. You can't play Beethoven with passion alone. The assistant said nothing more, but his silence carried a quiet disapproval that the Italian didn't notice. On the third day of the festival, there was a rehearsal for all the performers to prepare for the big night. The hall was filled with sound, pianos, flutes, violins, and even local instruments blending together in practice. Musicians greeted each other, exchanging smiles and respect. The Italian violinist, however, kept mostly to himself. He spent most of the morning tuning his instrument and criticizing the acoustics. "Too humid," he muttered. "This city makes the strings lose their tone." Across the room, a group of local musicians watched him. They had heard his comments. Some rolled their eyes. Others shook their heads. They were proud of their heritage, proud of their art, and though none of them dared to confront him, the disappointment in their faces said enough. Later that evening, a meeting was held with festival organizers to finalize the lineup. One of the main performers had unexpectedly canceled due to illness, leaving a spot open in the schedule. The organizers discussed possible replacements, but time was short. They needed someone local, someone ready. In that same building, the young woman from the small town had just arrived. She had come to the festival as a volunteer, hoping to help backstage, maybe tune instruments, or even just listen to the great musicians perform. She carried her old violin case with her, just in case there was an opportunity to play somewhere, even if only in a small rehearsal corner. While helping carry some equipment, she overheard the organizers discussing the vacant performance slot. They sounded worried. Without thinking too much, she spoke up softly. "I can play if you need someone. I know traditional music, and some classical pieces too." The room fell silent. A few of the organizers looked at her, surprised by her confidence. One of them smiled kindly but said, "This is an international stage. It's a big audience, you know?" "I understand," she said quietly, "but I'll give it my best." They didn't immediately agree, but her sincerity struck something in them. After a short discussion, one of the coordinators nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's hear you first. Play something." They led her to a small rehearsal room. She opened her old case carefully, tightened her bow, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, but filled with a purity that made everyone in the room pause. Her music wasn't loud or flashy, but it carried something that couldn't be taught: emotion, history, pride. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a moment before one of the organizers whispered, "You'll play tomorrow." That same moment, the Italian violinist was walking past the open door. He stopped, listening briefly. The sound caught his attention, but he didn't recognize the style. When he saw her old violin and her simple clothes, he smirked and continued walking. "A mariachi," he muttered under his breath. "They're putting folk players on the main stage now." He shook his head and kept going, unaware that the same girl he dismissed would soon change everything he believed about music. That night, the young woman couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She would play from her heart. She would show the world and that proud Italian man that mariachi music was not simple. It was alive. It was human. It was beautiful. And somewhere across the city, in a luxurious hotel suite, the Italian violinist polished his instrument, preparing to impress the audience with his flawless skill. He didn't know that the greatest lesson of his career was waiting just beyond the stage lights, inside the song of a young woman he hadn't yet truly heard. The young woman woke up before sunrise. She could hear the faint sounds of the city beginning to stir outside her small room. Birds chirped, distant voices called out, and the wind carried the smell of street food and flowers from nearby markets. She dressed quickly, careful not to wake her father, who was still asleep. Today would be different. Today she would step beyond the familiar streets of her town and into a world she had only dreamed about. Her violin rested in its case, worn but cherished. Every scratch and mark on it told a story. Hours of practice, nights filled with music, moments of frustration, and bursts of joy when a difficult note finally sang the way she imagined. She lifted it gently, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You and I," she whispered softly. "We can do this." She walked through the narrow streets, the sun slowly rising behind the mountains. The city around her seemed larger, louder, and faster than the town she had grown up in. The buildings reached toward the sky, Cars honked in the distance, and people moved quickly as if in a constant race. She felt small, almost invisible in the sea of strangers, but she carried herself with quiet determination. She reminded herself that it didn't matter how big the city was. What mattered was the music she had inside her. When she arrived at the festival, she was given a small room to prepare. It wasn't fancy, just a corner with a chair, a mirror, and a table where she could rest her violin case. But it was enough. She opened her violin, checked the strings, and practiced softly, letting the sound fill the room. She closed her eyes and imagined the audience waiting for her performance, and for the first time a small spark of courage warmed her chest. Her life up until now had been full of music, but always private. She had played at family gatherings, at small-town celebrations, or for the occasional tourist who wandered into the plaza. She had never faced a crowd like this, with people who had come expecting greatness from internationally renowned artists. The thought made her nervous but also excited. She realized that this was a chance to share her heritage, her heart, and the music she loved so deeply. She began to think about her father. He had taught her the rhythms of mariachi music, the stories behind each song, the joy and sorrow that could be conveyed in a single note. He had always told her that music was not just for the ear, it was for the soul. She could almost hear him now, standing behind her, nodding encouragingly. She smiled and whispered, "I won't let you down." Outside her door, the festival hall was busy with sound. Musicians tuned instruments, organizers spoke quickly into walkie-talkies, and volunteers moved hurriedly from room to room. She peeked out and saw the grandeur of the stage where she would play. It was large and intimidating, with lights that glowed like stars and microphones that looked foreign to her hands. She felt her heart beat faster, but she reminded herself that all of this was just a setting. The music came from her, not from the stage. During the morning, she met a few of the other musicians. Some were friendly, asking about her background, about where she had learned to play. She answered simply, not wanting to boast. She didn't feel the need to impress anyone with stories of awards or competitions. Her life had been simple and her music was honest. That honesty seemed to catch people off guard. A few smiled at her, saying quietly that they were looking forward to hearing her play. That small encouragement gave her courage. The Italian violinist was practicing on the main stage when she first caught a glimpse of him. He moved with precision, his bow striking the strings like a metronome. Every note was perfect, controlled, almost cold in its exactness. She watched him for a moment, curious, then turned back to her own practice. She wasn't there to compete. She was there to express herself. Later in the morning, the organizers came to take her to a rehearsal room. They wanted to hear her play before confirming her spot for the performance. She followed them quietly, carrying her violin case like it was a treasure chest. When they opened the door, she saw a small group of people waiting. Festival organizers, a few volunteers, and a pianist who would accompany her. She felt a twinge of nervousness, but it was different from fear. This was anticipation, a feeling she had been chasing all her life. She took a deep breath and lifted her violin. The room went quiet. She began with a simple mariachi melody, letting the notes flow naturally. At first, her fingers moved slowly, testing the strings, finding the right tone. Then, as she continued, she let herself go and the music began to breathe. It rose and fell like the stories it carried, tales of love, heartbreak, hope, and joy. The people in the room listened silently. The organizers exchanged glances, impressed by the depth in her playing. The pianist joined in, carefully following her lead, and the two instruments blended in a way that was surprising. The music was not just a performance. It was a conversation, a story being told in real time. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. No one spoke at first. Then one of the organizers smiled, almost with relief. "You'll perform tomorrow?" he said quietly. "The audience deserves to hear this." She nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had expected nerves, maybe even rejection. But instead, she had been heard. Her music had spoken for her. That afternoon, she wandered through the festival hall trying to calm her nerves. She saw musicians from around the world, dressed in elegant clothes, carrying instruments she had only seen in magazines. She felt a pang of self-doubt. Could her small violin and her mariachi style really stand up on this stage? But she reminded herself that music wasn't a contest. It was about connection. And she had already connected with those who mattered, the people who understood her heart. While she walked, she overheard a few festival-goers talking. One mentioned the Italian violinist, praising his technique but dismissing other styles. She clenched her fist lightly under her jacket. It wasn't anger that she felt, and it was determination. She didn't want to argue or prove him wrong for the sake of pride. She wanted to show the truth of her music, the way it could move people, the way it carried history and emotion. That evening, she found a quiet corner and practiced again. Her bow moved across the strings with increasing confidence. She imagined the stage lights, the audience, and even the Italian violinist sitting in the front row, listening. She didn't play for him exactly, but she thought about how he might react if he truly heard her music. Would he understand? Would he feel what she felt when she played? She didn't know, but she hoped that maybe, just maybe, her music could reach him. Back in the luxury hotel where he was staying, the Italian violinist reviewed his own performance. He was meticulous, replaying every note in his mind, critiquing every movement. He believed that only precision could impress an audience. Passion alone was not enough. He had learned this from years of training, from teachers who demanded perfection, from concert halls filled with judges and critics. He didn't know that outside. A young woman with a modest violin was preparing to teach him a lesson that no amount of training could. She had no reputation, no awards, no accolades. But she had music in her hands and a heart full of stories that were waiting to be told. That night she barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the melodies she had practiced, imagining how it would sound on the big stage. She thought about the audience, about the festival organizers, and about the possibility of performing alongside some of the most respected musicians in the world. The excitement was overwhelming, but it was mingled with a quiet fear. She was just a girl from a small town after all. What if she wasn't enough? Yet every time doubt crept in, she thought of her father's words. Music is not about being better than someone else. Music is about being true to yourself. That thought settled her mind. She realized that no matter what happened tomorrow, she had already succeeded. She had faced the first test. The courage to step forward, to be heard, to let her music speak. The sun rose again, painting the city in shades of gold and orange. The festival hall began to fill with sound once more. Musicians rehearsed, organizers made final checks, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Somewhere in the midst of it all, the young woman tightened her violin strings, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "It's time." She didn't know how the audience would react. She didn't know if the Italian violinist would listen or dismiss her. All she knew was that her music was ready to speak, and she would not hold back. In that moment, she felt a quiet strength grow inside her. She realized that music was bigger than fear, bigger than judgment, bigger than any stage or audience. It was life itself, and she was ready to share it. The festival hall buzzed with activity as the young woman carried her violin to the small waiting area near the stage. She could hear the muffled sounds of rehearsals coming from the main auditorium, and the vibrations of music made her heart race. She had been practicing for weeks, but the thought of performing in front of an audience of hundreds, including some of the most famous musicians in the world, made her feel both nervous and excited as she adjusted her bow and tuned her strings one last time. A festival organizer approached her. "We need you to step onto the main stage for a quick rehearsal," he said. "It won't be long, just enough to check the sound." Her stomach tightened. The main stage was enormous, filled with lights and equipment she had only seen from afar. She nodded silently, trying to steady her breathing. This was it. A small part of her wanted to turn back, to run to the safety of her quiet room. But she remembered her father's voice and the determination that had carried her this far. She lifted her violin and followed the organizer. The main stage was more intimidating up close than she had imagined. Spotlights hung above, and microphones were positioned to catch every sound. Behind the stage, technicians moved quickly, checking wires and instruments. The audience seating stretched far beyond her sight, empty for now but vast. She felt like a tiny figure in a giant world, carrying a small violin that had never seen anything like this. She took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. As her feet touched the polished wood, she felt a shiver of anticipation run through her. She placed her violin under her chin, tightened her bow, and prepared to play. Just then, the door at the side of the stage opened and she saw him, the Italian violinist she had heard about, whose words had sparked her determination. He was taller than she expected, wearing a tailored suit and holding his own violin with a practiced grip. He looked down at her with a faint smirk, his expression a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "So," he said in a measured tone, his accent clear, "you are the one they sent to replace the missing performer? A mariachi player, I see." She felt a flicker of fear, but she did not respond. Instead, she let her eyes meet his briefly, and then she focused on her instrument. She had no intention of arguing with him. Words were not her weapon. Music was. "Are you ready?" the stage technician asked, glancing at both of them. She nodded, and the room fell silent. Even the bustling technicians seemed to hold their breath. She began to play. At first, the melody was soft, almost shy, as if testing the space around her. Then, as her confidence grew, the music became stronger. Each note carried a story, of streets filled with laughter, of families gathering to celebrate, of quiet nights when only the stars listened to her practice. The violin sang with a warmth and clarity that surprised even her. The Italian violinist watched silently, his smirk fading slightly. He raised his eyebrows not out of admiration but from surprise. He had expected simplicity, perhaps even mistakes. But the music he heard was precise, deliberate, and full of emotion. There was a technical skill in her playing, hidden beneath what he had assumed was casual folk style. As she continued, her confidence grew. She added small flourishes, subtle shifts in tempo, gentle pauses that drew the listener in. Her fingers moved with a fluidity that came from years of practice and deep understanding of the music she loved. It wasn't classical technique in the traditional European sense, but it had its own mastery, a mastery born of passion, patience, and lived experience. The young woman could feel the attention in the room change. The organizers leaned forward, exchanging quiet whispers. Even the pianist who would accompany her during the performance watched intently, nodding subtly at her phrasing. She realized she was no longer playing for approval. She was playing to share something larger than herself, to let the music speak. The Italian violinist stepped closer, moving along the edge of the stage. He listened with an intensity she could feel, his sharp eyes following every bowstroke, every note that rose and fell. For a moment he seemed almost restless, as if he could not decide whether to dismiss her or try to understand what she was doing. She finished the piece with a long, drawn-out note that resonated in the hall. The sound lingered in the air, creating a quiet that felt almost sacred. She lowered her violin slowly, her chest rising and falling with her excitement and nervousness. The room stayed silent for a moment, and then one of the organizers clapped softly. Others joined in, and soon the quiet hall was filled with applause. The young woman's cheeks flushed, not with pride alone, but with the realization that her music had touched these people, even if only for a brief moment. The Italian violinist remained silent. He lowered his violin, and for the first time she noticed something different in his expression. It was no longer smugness. There was curiosity, maybe even a hint of respect. He did not speak, but the way he studied her, the way he tilted his head as if listening more carefully, suggested that he was hearing the music in a way he hadn't expected. Finally he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Your technique isn't unusual, and yet it is precise. I did not expect this from a mariachi player." The young woman did not reply. She had no desire to argue with him. She knew that her music had spoken more loudly than words ever could. The stage technician checked the microphones and whispered instructions to her about the timing for the performance tomorrow. She nodded, absorbing everything, trying not to let her excitement overwhelm her. She knew the real challenge would come when the audience was watching, and not just a handful of organizers. After rehearsal, she stepped off the stage, her hands trembling slightly. The Italian violinist followed her, maintaining a careful distance. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You play with conviction. That is rare." She glanced at him briefly, surprised by the tone. It was not praise exactly, and it was not arrogance. It was recognition, a recognition that the music had demanded. She nodded politely, saying nothing, letting the moment pass without argument. Over the next few hours, she wandered the festival halls, listening to other rehearsals, learning from observing. She noticed the precision of the classical musicians, the elegance of their bows, the careful attention to every note. And yet she also noticed the warmth, the emotion, the human connection that sometimes got lost in the pursuit of perfection. She understood that her own music could bridge these worlds, technical skill and raw emotion, tradition and individuality. That evening, The young woman returned to her small room to practice once more. She felt a mixture of nervous energy and calm determination. She knew that tomorrow would be the real test. She could face thousands of eyes and ears, and she could also face the critical gaze of the Italian violinist. As she played, she imagined the stage filled with people, the lights shining down, and the sound of her violin reaching every corner of the hall. She let herself play freely, experimenting with new rhythms, adding small variations to her melody. Her music was alive, growing, and becoming something that belonged not just to her, but to everyone who would hear it. Meanwhile, the Italian violinist was in his own room, preparing for his performance. He practiced with the intensity of someone who had spent years perfecting every note. And yet, despite his preparation, he could not shake the memory of the young woman's playing. Her music was still in his mind, refusing to leave. It was not just the sound. It was the feeling, the passion, the life behind each note. He replayed the melody she had performed in his mind, trying to analyze it, to understand what made it so different. It was not easy to categorize. It was neither purely classical nor purely folk. It was something in between, something that demanded attention and respect. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of humility. The festival hall grew quiet as night fell. The other musicians rested, organizers checked schedules, and the city outside carried on with its busy life. The young woman lay in bed, her violin resting nearby, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. She was tired but not drained. She was ready, not only to perform but to show what her music could convey. She realized that the chance encounter on the stage had already changed her. She had faced a challenge far greater than any technical difficulty. She had faced doubt, judgment, and expectation. And she had risen to it not with words but with her music. The Italian violinist too was changed. He had heard something that forced him to reconsider his assumptions, to question his own ideas about music and mastery. And although he would not admit it yet, he was intrigued. He wanted to see what the young woman could do on a full stage in front of an audience that would hear every note, every emotion. The next morning, the festival would begin in earnest. The young woman would step onto the stage carrying her small violin and her courage, and the Italian violinist would watch, listening closely, ready to witness something that could challenge everything he believed about music. In that moment, both of them were unaware of how profoundly this encounter would change their lives. One had the chance to prove herself to the world. The other had the chance to learn a lesson about humility, respect, and the power of music that comes not from technique alone, but from the heart. The day of her performance arrived. From the moment she woke, her mind was alive with a mix of excitement, nervousness, and determination. She could hear the city stirring outside her window as the sun spilled golden light over the rooftops. Today was not just another day. Today she would step onto a stage bigger than anything she had ever imagined, and she would share her music with people who had never heard it played this way before. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple outfit that allowed her to move freely. Her violin rested in its case nearby, each scratch and mark a memory of hours spent practicing, of nights when her fingers ached but her heart was full. She lifted it gently, running her fingers along the polished wood. "We're ready," she whispered. "Let's show them what we can do." The festival hall was buzzing with energy. Musicians, organizers, and volunteers moved quickly, checking instruments, adjusting microphones, and reviewing notes. The audience was slowly filling the seats, a mixture of locals, tourists, and international guests who had come to witness the music. Excitement hung in the air like electricity, making her stomach flutter. Backstage, she could see the Italian violinist preparing for his own performance. He tuned his instrument with precision, moving with the elegance of someone who had spent decades perfecting every detail. He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. She met his gaze for a moment and then looked away, focusing on her music instead of his judgment. When the organizers called her name, her heart jumped. This was it. She carried her violin carefully and walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but she took a deep breath and stepped forward. The audience's chatter faded into silence as she approached the center. She placed the violin under her chin and tightened her bow, feeling the familiar weight of her instrument. For a moment she closed her eyes and remembered all the hours of practice, the support of her father, and the small town where her love for music had begun. This was her moment, and she was ready. She began to play. The first notes were gentle, cautious, almost shy, but they carried a warmth that immediately filled the hall. The audience listened quietly, drawn in by the honesty of her music. Her fingers moved with precision, yet there was an emotion behind each note that spoke of years of living with the music, of understanding its rhythm and soul. As she continued, her confidence grew. The melody rose and fell like waves, moving with a life of its own. She played a traditional mariachi piece, but she added subtle flourishes, inspired by her understanding of classical music. Each variation was intentional, designed to express the story behind the music, the joy, sorrow, love, and pride that it carried. The audience was captivated. People leaned forward in their seats, listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others glanced at their neighbors, sharing smiles and quiet nods of appreciation. It was as if the music had created a bridge connecting everyone in the room to something deeper than the performance itself. The Italian violinist watched from the side. At first, he had expected something simple, even crude. But as the young woman's bow danced across the strings, he felt a shift inside him. He recognized the skill, yes, but more than that, he recognized the soul behind it. Each note was purposeful, yet alive with emotion. He realized that he had been wrong to dismiss mariachi music so quickly. It was not simple. It was sophisticated in its own way, demanding not only technique but feeling, intuition, and a deep connection to its roots. She played on, her movements graceful and natural. The music carried the audience through a journey, lively rhythms that made them tap their feet, soft passages that brought tears to their eyes, sudden bursts of energy that made hearts race. It was more than a performance. It was a story being told without words, a history being shared through every note. The young woman could feel the energy in the room. Every response from the audience fueled her playing, encouraging her to give even more. She was not just performing for them, she was connecting with them. She was showing them the depth of her culture, the beauty of the music she had grown up with, and the power of emotion carried through a simple violin. At one point, she glanced at the Italian violinist. He was still watching, his expression serious, almost contemplative. She could see his admiration, though he would never admit it aloud. That glance gave her strength. She realized that her music was not just touching the audience, but even the most critical and proud of listeners. The piece reached its climax, a part that required both technical skill and deep feeling. Her fingers moved swiftly, her bow striking the strings with a controlled passion. She felt herself fully immersed in the music, forgetting everything else. The stage, the lights, the audience, even the Italian violinist. All that existed was the melody, the story, and the connection it created. As the final notes rang out, the hall was silent for a heartbeat, holding on to the sound before it faded completely. Then slowly the applause began. At first a few claps, then more, until the entire hall erupted in cheers and whistles. People stood, some clapping over and over, others wiping tears from their eyes. The young woman lowered her violin, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and awe. She had done it. She had shared her music, and it had been heard, truly heard. The Italian violinist approached her after the performance. He no longer carried the smirk of arrogance. Instead, there was a hint of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of her skill and passion. "You have talent," he said simply. "And more than that, you have feeling, something I cannot teach no matter how much I try." The young woman nodded politely, not seeking praise but feeling a sense of connection. She realized that music had spoken louder than words ever could. She had shown him, not through argument but through the power of her art, that mariachi music was not simple. It was rich, complex, and capable of touching hearts in ways even the most skilled classical musician could appreciate. In the days that followed, word of her performance spread quickly. People spoke of the young woman who had stepped onto the stage with a humble violin and captivated an international audience. The festival organizers praised her courage and artistry. Fellow musicians came to congratulate her, some curious to learn how she had achieved such depth in her playing. The Italian violinist, too, found himself thinking about her music. He replayed the melody in his mind, analyzing it, trying to understand the emotion that had made it so powerful. He realized that his earlier judgments had been short-sighted. Talent and artistry were not confined to the style of music one played or the prestige of one's training. They came from the heart, from the connection between the musician and the music, and from the ability to make others feel that connection. One evening, after the festival had ended, the young woman returned to her small room. She sat quietly, violin in hand, reflecting on what had happened. She had faced fear, doubt, and the intimidating presence of some of the most skilled musicians in the world, and she had succeeded, not by imitating anyone but by staying true to herself and the music she loved. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Music is not about being better than someone else. Music is about being true to yourself. She smiled, realizing that she had lived those words. She had played from her heart, and the world had listened. The Italian violinist, meanwhile, had returned to his hotel room. He sat quietly, his own violin resting on his lap, and reflected on the young woman's performance. For the first time in his life, he felt humbled by another musician, not by technique alone, but by the authenticity, the courage, and the emotion behind it. He realized that music was bigger than any single style, bigger than any reputation, and bigger than his own pride. The festival's final night brought them together on stage once more. The organizers suggested a collaborative performance, a duet blending classical and mariachi styles. The Italian violinist hesitated at first, unsure how it would work, but the young woman's calm confidence encouraged him. Together they played, and the audience witnessed something extraordinary. Two worlds of music coming together, not in competition but in harmony. The young woman's melody intertwined with his precise, refined notes, creating a sound that was both new and familiar. The audience cheered, not just for the performance, but for the unity it represented. The bridging of cultures, the meeting of tradition and technique, and the recognition that music's power lay in connection, not in labels. When the final note faded, the applause was thunderous. People stood, clapped, and cheered, some moved to tears. The young woman and the Italian violinist exchanged a look of mutual respect, each understanding that this performance had changed them. For her, it was a confirmation of her talent and courage. For him, it was a lesson in humility and the true meaning of artistry. As they left the stage, she realized that her journey had only begun. She had faced doubt and judgment, and she had triumphed. But more importantly, she had opened a door that allowed music to be seen not as simple or complex, but as human, emotional, and alive. And the Italian violinist, once so certain of his own ideas, now carried a new understanding. He had learned that true music was not measured by technique alone, but by the heart, the story, and the connection it could create. He had been changed not by criticism, but by listening to. After the festival had quieted down and the applause faded, the young woman found a corner backstage where she could sit and catch her breath. The adrenaline was still rushing through her veins, and her hands shook slightly from the intensity of the performance. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and something she couldn't quite name. The strange, humbling sense that her music had reached people in a way words never could. She sat there quietly, letting the moment settle. The hall was now empty except for a few volunteers packing up instruments and equipment. The lights were dimmed, leaving only the faint glow from the control room. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to feel calm. She closed her eyes and thought about her father, imagining him standing beside her, smiling quietly, proud of what she had accomplished. She didn't notice at first that someone was approaching. When she opened her eyes, the Italian violinist was standing in front of her, holding his violin case carefully at his side. His expression was serious, his usual confident air softened by something she hadn't seen before. Curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "I wanted to speak with you," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. Not to critique, but to understand. She looked at him, unsure what to say. He had once dismissed her music as simple, unworthy of attention, yet here he was, seeking understanding. She nodded slightly, gesturing for him to sit beside her. "I have listened to many musicians in my life," he began, "some of the finest in the world. I have always valued precision, technique, and discipline above all else. But what I heard from you, it was different. I did not expect it, and I cannot stop thinking about it." She listened quietly. She did not interrupt. He continued, "I assumed mariachi music was simple. I was wrong. It is alive. It is disciplined in its own way. But more than that, it is full of emotion. Every note you played carried a story, a life. I had never understood it until tonight. Her heart fluttered, but she remained composed. "Thank you," she said softly. "I am glad you could hear it." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I have spent years learning the rules of music, following the path set by masters. I thought that was the only way to create something meaningful. But what you play, it has feeling I cannot teach. I realize that music is not just about rules. It is about expression, connection, and soul." The young woman nodded. She had suspected that he might be capable of understanding. But hearing it spoken aloud felt different. It was a moment of genuine recognition, a rare thing in the world of music where pride and reputation often overshadowed authenticity. "I played for the audience," she said, "but I also played for myself. Music is not just performance, it is life. It is the stories of the people who taught it to me, the streets I grew up on, the celebrations I witnessed, the sadness I felt. If you listen carefully, music carries everything with it." He was silent for a moment, as if absorbing her words. "You are right," he said finally. "I have been listening for notes and technique, but not for life. Tonight, you reminded me that music is bigger than perfection. It is human." For the first time, he allowed himself to smile, a small, genuine smile that softened the sharp edges of his usual demeanor. She realized that he was being sincere. He was not giving empty praise. He had been affected by her music, changed in some way, and he wanted to acknowledge it. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not pride in the way people might expect, but a quiet joy that comes from being understood. Her music had done more than entertain. It had touched a heart that had once dismissed her style entirely. "I have something to ask you," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Would you be willing to perform with me tomorrow? A duet, together." Her eyes widened slightly. She had not expected this. The thought of performing alongside someone of his caliber was intimidating. She took a deep breath, letting the idea sink in. I would be honored," she said finally. He nodded. "It will be a challenge for both of us. Our styles are different, our training is different. But I think we can learn from each other. We can create something that neither of us could alone." She smiled, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I think we can," she said. That evening, they began to practice together in a quiet room backstage. At first, it was awkward. Their styles clashed, the Italian's precise and disciplined technique meeting her flowing and emotional approach. He suggested minor adjustments, and she offered subtle variations. They experimented, sometimes struggling to find harmony, but each attempt brought them closer. As they continued, a rhythm began to emerge. The Italian noticed the way her music could shift seamlessly from soft, delicate passages to lively, powerful melodies. He began to follow her lead, adapting his classical technique to accommodate her style. She in turn found new ways to blend her mariachi melodies with his harmonies, creating a sound that was unique and compelling. With each repetition, their music grew richer, more intricate, and more expressive. They began to understand each other not just as musicians but as storytellers. The room was filled with sound that neither had heard before, a combination of precision and passion, discipline and freedom. During a break, he looked at her thoughtfully. "I underestimated you," he admitted quietly. "I thought I knew everything about music, about performance, about how to move an audience. But you have shown me that there is more than one way to touch hearts. You have reminded me that music is about truth, not just technique." She looked at him, her expression calm but reflective. "It is easy to forget that," she said softly. "Sometimes we get lost in rules and expectations and pride. But music is more than that. It is life itself, and it is strongest when it is honest." He nodded slowly. "I will remember that," he said. "You have given me a gift tonight more than you know, not just in your playing, but in what you have taught me about listening, humility, and respect." The young woman felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had not played to prove anything, not to win admiration or fame. She had played because it was who she was, and in doing so she had inspired someone who had once dismissed her. That realization filled her with calm strength. They continued their rehearsal late into the night, experimenting with melodies, harmonies, and rhythm. Sometimes they laughed at mistakes. Sometimes they fell silent in concentration. And sometimes they simply listened, allowing the music to guide them. The process was exhausting but exhilarating, a journey that neither of them wanted to end. By the time they finally stopped, the young woman was tired, but not drained. She felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the technical perfection of their performance. They had created something together, a blend of two worlds, two traditions, and two hearts committed to music. The Italian violinist packed his instrument carefully, his mind still replaying their duet. For the first time, he felt that collaboration was not just about combining skills, but about understanding another person's perspective, their history, and their soul. He realized that he had been proud, yes, but that pride had limited him. Now he felt a sense of openness and curiosity he had not experienced in years. The young woman returned to her small room, her violin resting beside her. She reflected on what had happened, not just during the performance, but in the private moments with him. She realized that teaching someone through music, even someone as experienced and accomplished as the Italian violinist, required patience, empathy, and humility. And she had found that within herself. That night she lay in bed thinking about the journey she had begun months ago, practicing alone in her small town, dreaming of this very moment. She had faced doubt, criticism, and fear, and she had risen to the challenge. She understood that music was not just notes on a page or technique mastered over years. It was courage, honesty, and the willingness to connect with others in the most human way possible. The Italian violinist in his own room was thinking the same thing. He had been reminded that music was more than mastery. It was heart, soul, and the stories carried through sound. He had been humbled by someone he had once dismissed, and in that humility he had grown. He realized that respect for others, for their talent, their history, and their perspective was just as important as skill. As the night grew deeper, both of them slept with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Tomorrow would be another day, another performance, but they were ready. Not just to play, but to continue learning from each other, to continue sharing the music that had brought them together, and to continue discovering the power of connection through sound. In the quiet darkness, one simple truth remained clear to both. Music was alive, human, and transformative, and through it, both teacher and student, mentor and peer could be changed forever. The day of the duet arrived, and the atmosphere in the festival hall was electric. Musicians and audience members alike were buzzing with anticipation, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The young woman arrived early, carrying her violin carefully, her mind calm but alert. She could feel the weight of the moment, not as pressure but as a responsibility to share the music they had worked so hard to create. She found the Italian violinist already tuning his instrument on the stage. He looked up at her and smiled briefly, a quiet acknowledgement that they were in this together. There was no arrogance, no prideful tension between them, only focus and a shared understanding that music was bigger than either of them alone. As the audience filed into their seats, the lights dimmed and the stage was bathed in a gentle glow. The organizers announced the performance, introducing it as a collaboration between the best classical violinist of the festival and a young mariachi player whose talent had captivated everyone. The applause was polite at first, but it carried a curious energy. People were eager to hear how two different worlds of music could come together. They walked to the center of the stage, facing each other, and for a moment, there was silence. She adjusted her violin under her chin, feeling the familiar weight and warmth of the instrument. He did the same, his posture straight but relaxed. They shared a brief glance, a silent agreement to trust each other and let the music lead. Then she began. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost like a whisper, but they held a warmth that immediately drew the audience in. She introduced the melody gently, allowing the rich tones of mariachi music to fill the hall. Each note carried a story, the laughter of celebrations, the quiet moments of reflection, the joy and sorrow of life itself. The Italian violinist joined in carefully, at first following her rhythm, then gradually weaving his precise, disciplined technique into the melody. The combination was delicate at first, but soon it grew richer. Her expressive phrasing met his controlled elegance, creating a tapestry of sound that was unlike anything the audience had heard before. The audience was captivated. People leaned forward, listening intently, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music. There were moments of playful rhythm, lively bursts that made hearts race, and moments of gentle softness that brought tears to eyes. The two violinists were not competing. They were conversing, telling a story together, each note a word, each passage a sentence. As the music unfolded, the young woman began to feel a profound sense of freedom. She had prepared for this moment for months, and now she was not just performing, she was sharing herself, letting the music breathe and grow with the other violinist. She added subtle flourishes, small variations that carried the essence of mariachi tradition, and he responded with harmonies that elevated her melody, blending classical sophistication with heartfelt emotion. The Italian violinist, for his part, felt himself being carried along by her playing. He had expected to lead, to showcase his skill, but she had taught him to listen, to follow, to trust the natural flow of emotion in the music. He realized that for all his years of training, he had rarely experienced this kind of connection, where every note was both precise and alive, both disciplined and spontaneous. At one point, the melody shifted to a quiet, introspective section. The audience could feel the tension, the subtle interplay between their instruments. She played a gentle, flowing passage that spoke of longing and hope, and he answered with soft, deliberate notes that echoed her emotion, creating a dialogue without words. It was intimate, profound, and utterly mesmerizing. The music then rose to a lively, spirited section. Her fingers danced across the strings, playful and agile, bringing the audience to the edge of their seats. He followed, adding flourishes and harmonies that elevated her melody even higher. The combination of their styles, the raw energy of mariachi and the refined control of classical, created a sound that was new, vibrant, and unforgettable. Throughout the performance, she felt the connection between them deepen. It was not just musical, it was human. They were communicating through sound, sharing understanding, respect, and trust. Every note she played was answered. Every variation he added was considered. And together they created something neither could have achieved alone. The audience responded with awe. They could sense the story behind the music, the conversation between two musicians from different worlds, the blending of tradition and innovation. Whispers of admiration floated through the hall, and many were visibly moved, caught up in the richness of the performance. As the final section approached, the music swelled with emotion. The young woman played with all her heart, every note carrying the depth of her experience, the culture she had grown up with, and the joy she found in sharing it. He matched her intensity, letting his technical mastery enhance the passion she poured into the melody. Together, they created a climactic moment of harmony, a fusion of two styles that felt inevitable and natural. Then, slowly, the music began to fade. She played a final, sustained note, long and resonant, while he responded with a soft, gentle harmony that allowed the sound to linger in the hall. The silence that followed was almost as powerful as the music itself. Every listener held their breath for a moment, feeling the weight of what they had just witnessed, and then the applause erupted. The hall shook with cheers, claps, and whistles. People rose to their feet, some shouting words of encouragement, others crying quietly from the sheer beauty of the performance. The young woman and the Italian violinist lowered their violins, their hearts racing, their faces glowing with the joy of shared achievement. The Italian violinist turned to her and spoke softly, almost under his breath. "You were incredible. I have never heard anything like this." She smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. "So were you," she replied. "We did it together." After the performance, the organizers invited them to meet the audience. People came forward to congratulate them, expressing wonder at how two styles of music had come together so perfectly. Some asked questions about her background, about the traditions of mariachi music, about how she and the Italian violinist had blended their techniques. She answered humbly, explaining that it was about listening, understanding, and letting the music guide them. The Italian violinist watched her interact with the audience. He realized that her strength was not only in her skill, but in her humility, her authenticity, and her ability to connect with people. He felt a deep respect for her, one that went beyond professional admiration. She had reminded him that music was not about competition, but about expression, connection, and shared humanity. Later that evening, they returned to the stage one last time, not for a performance, but to pack up and reflect. The hall was empty now, the audience gone, leaving behind only the echoes of applause and the lingering resonance of their music. "You've changed the way I think about music," he said quietly. "I have learned more from you in these past days than from years of study alone." "And you've taught me something too," she replied. "You've shown me that structure and technique can enhance emotion, That blending tradition with new ideas can create something extraordinary. Music is stronger when we learn from each other. They packed their instruments in silence, both feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. It was not about winning or recognition. It was about the journey, the connection, and the growth they had experienced together. As they stepped outside, the night air was cool and calm. The city lights shimmered around them, reflecting off the streets like scattered stars. They walked quietly for a while, both lost in thought. She realized that this experience had given her more than an audience or applause. It had given her confidence, a deeper understanding of her craft, and the proof that music could cross boundaries, touch hearts, and change perspectives. The Italian violinist, too, reflected on what had happened. He realized that his initial assumptions, pride, and narrow view of music had been challenged in the most beautiful way. He felt grateful for the young woman who had reminded him of the essence of music, its ability to tell stories, connect people, and evoke emotion. In the weeks and months that followed, their duet became talked about far beyond the festival. Musicians and audiences alike marveled at the performance that had brought together two worlds of music in harmony. They received invitations to perform together in different cities, and their collaboration inspired other musicians to explore blending traditions, cultures, and styles in new ways. Yet, despite the growing attention, they remained grounded. For the young woman, it was still about the music, the story, and the joy of sharing it. For the Italian violinist, it was about humility, respect, and the understanding that learning never ends, no matter how skilled one becomes. Their journey had begun with doubt, skepticism, and the expectation that one style was superior to another, but it ended with connection, mutual respect, and the creation of something extraordinary. They had shown the world that music is not measured by labels, training, or reputation. It is measured by heart, authenticity, and the courage to share it fully. In the end, the festival became more than an event. It became a testament to the power of openness, collaboration, and human connection. Two musicians from different worlds had come together and reminded